pay attention to the man in the grey sedan. It is 4:32 p.m. on a crisp Tuesday in October. What you are looking at is grainy security footage from a neighbour's camera, pointed down a quiet suburban street. The man, Mark Farrow, is parked in front of a modest two-storey home. He is not the subject of this story. Not really. He is just the first domino in a line that is about to fall with breathtaking speed and unimaginable cruelty. The date is October 15th, 2019. Mark leans over to the passenger seat, says something we cannot hear, and smiles. A small head with blonde pigtails pops up, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. She unbuckles her seatbelt and scrambles out of the car, a pink backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She runs up the walkway to the front door of her mother's house. Mark doesn't drive away. He waits. He always waits until she is safely inside. The front door opens and Lily disappears into the home. A moment later, her face appears in the large picture window next to the door. She waves, a wide, enthusiastic gesture only a child can produce. Mark, his face etched with a father's simple, profound love, waves back. He holds that wave for 3 seconds. Then he puts the car in drive and pulls away from the curb. He has just seen his daughter alive for the last time. What Mark Farrow does not know, what no one could possibly fathom in that benign, sun-drenched moment, is that inside that house, a clock has just started. A countdown measured not in hours, but in seconds. 40 seconds to be exact. From the moment Mark's car turned the corner, Lily Farrow had less than a minute to live. This is the story of a little girl whose light was extinguished in an instant. But it is also the story of a monster hiding in the most ordinary of places. More than that, it is a story about the chilling reality of red flags that are ignored, of desperate warnings that go unheard, and of a system that is designed to look for the obvious villain, often allowing the real one to walk freely among us, smiling and waiting. To understand what happened inside that house, you first have to understand the girl who called it home for half of every week. Lily Farrow was, by all accounts, a spark. She was 7 years old, in the 2nd grade, and possessed a fierce, vibrant energy that seemed too big for her small frame. Her teachers described her as endlessly curious, the kind of student who was not satisfied with a simple answer, but always had to ask, why? She loved the colour purple, mismatched socks, and drawing. Her father, Mark, and her mother, Sarah, had binders filled with her creations. Fantastical worlds populated by smiling dragons, lopsided castles, and stick-figure families, where everyone, including the cat, held hands. In every picture she drew of herself, she had impossibly long hair and was always smiling. Her parents had divorced a year prior. The split was amicable, born of the sad, quiet realization that they had grown into different people. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no custody battles. Their focus, singular and shared, was Lily. They lived just 10 minutes apart in the same town to make the 50-50 custody arrangement as seamless as possible. Mark was a contractor, Sarah a paralegal. Their lives were structured around Lily's school schedule, her soccer practices, her play dates. Theirs was a modern, fractured family, but one held together by a powerful, unconditional love for their child. Mark and Sarah spoke almost daily, coordinating logistics, sharing funny stories about Lily, and presenting a united front. Lily, in turn, was a happy, well-adjusted child who knew she was the centre of both of her parents' worlds. She had 2 bedrooms, 2 sets of toys, and double the love. But in the last 6 months, a new element had been introduced into this carefully balanced equation. His name was David Palmer. Sarah had met David at a local coffee shop. He was handsome, in a quiet, unassuming way. He was an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. He was polite, soft-spoken, and seemed genuinely interested in Sarah's life. He listened. After the slow erosion of her marriage, being truly heard felt like a revelation. On paper, David Palmer was perfect. He had a stable job, a clean record, and a calm demeanour that was a soothing balm on Sarah's frayed nerves. He never raised his voice. He brought her flowers. When she introduced him to Lily, he was patient and kind, never pushing, never trying to be a replacement father. He brought her a colouring book of exotic birds and sat with her at the kitchen table, quietly sharpening her coloured pencils. Sarah, cautious at first, slowly began to let him into her life, and, by extension, Lily's. He started spending weekends at the house. He helped with groceries, fixed a leaky faucet, and sat on the couch watching cartoons with Lily on Saturday mornings. To the outside world, and even to Sarah, he was the model of a perfect new partner. A man who was stepping into a complicated situation with grace and respect. But a piece of paper can only tell you so much. A calm demeanour can be a mask, and respect can be a carefully constructed performance. Beneath the surface of the quiet, helpful accountant was a man seething with a dark and possessive jealousy. David Palmer was not building a new family. He was trying to conquer a territory. And in his mind, there was an unwelcome, persistent intruder in that territory. Mark Farrow. He never spoke ill of Mark in front of Sarah. He would listen patiently as she coordinated schedules with her ex-husband, his face a neutral mask. But his resentment festered in private. To David, every phone call between Mark and Sarah was a violation. Every time Mark picked Lily up or dropped her off, it was an incursion. He saw Mark's continued, healthy involvement in his daughter's life not as good co-parenting, but as a failure on his part to fully supplant the old family structure with his own. And at the centre of this perceived conflict was Lily. In David's warped perception, the 7-year-old girl was not a child to be loved. She was a symbol. She was the living, breathing, permanent link between Sarah and Mark, a bond he could never break. So he decided he would have to erase it. Investigators would later uncover the chilling evidence of this hidden obsession. They found a private journal David kept, filled with entries that grew more and more agitated. He wrote about the incessant phone calls. He described the sight of Mark's car on the street as a personal insult. In one entry, dated 2 weeks before Lily's death, he wrote, "She will never be fully mine as long as he is in the picture. As long as she is in the picture. The connection must be severed. Completely." He had also started a new, secret life online. His browsing history was a map of his malevolent intent. He spent hours on forums dedicated to forensic science, searching for terms like how to defeat luminol, how long does DNA last, and best way to clean a crime scene. He researched soil types in remote state parks miles outside the city. 2 days before that final sunny Tuesday, he made a cash purchase at a local hardware store. A shovel, 2 heavy-duty tarps, and 3 bags of industrial-grade lye. The man who sharpened Lily's coloured pencils was also planning, with the meticulous detail of an accountant, how to dispose of her body. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. His normality, the most terrifying weapon he possessed. Sarah, wanting so badly to build a new life, had unknowingly invited a predator into her home. Oz on October 15th, the day Lily died, the timeline was both mundane and horrifyingly precise. Mark picked Lily up from school at 3:30 p.m. They went for ice cream, a small tradition they had. At 4:25 p.m., they pulled up to Sarah's house. At 4:32 p.m., Lily got out of the car. At 4:33 p.m., she was at the front window, waving to her father. David had opened the door for her. He had been home from work early that day, telling Sarah he had a migraine. As Lily stepped inside, he greeted her with a warm smile. Sarah was in the kitchen, starting to prep for dinner, her back to the front of the house. "I have a surprise for you, Lilybug," David said, his voice soft and inviting. "It's in the basement." Lily's eyes lit up. A surprise? Maybe it was the new dollhouse she had been wanting. She followed him without hesitation, her little footsteps pattering on the hardwood floor towards the basement door. Sarah, chopping onions at the counter, heard them. She thought nothing of it. David was always planning little games and surprises for Lily. At approximately 4:33 and 40 seconds, the basement door clicked shut. What happened next was swift, brutal, and silent. There was no game. There was no surprise. There was only the cold, premeditated execution of a plan that had been festering for months. The medical examiner would later determine the cause of death as blunt force trauma, followed by asphyxiation. The act itself took less than 20 seconds. It was a vicious, shocking explosion of violence in the quiet concrete stillness of a suburban basement. Sound of a muffled thud, then silence. Upstairs, Sarah heard a faint bump. It was so indistinct, she likely registered it as a dropped box or a piece of furniture being knocked. She called out, "Is everything okay down there?" David's voice, impossibly calm, floated up the stairs. "Yep, we're just looking for the old board games. Be up in a minute." His performance was flawless. In the minutes that followed, while Sarah continued to make a salad, David Palmer was engaged in a different kind of work. He wrapped Lily's small body in the tarps he had pre-positioned in a storage closet. He used bleach and industrial cleaners he had hidden under the basement sink to scrub the concrete floor. He was methodical, efficient, and utterly devoid of emotion. He was simply balancing a ledger. When he came back upstairs 10 minutes later, he was not flustered or out of breath. He walked into the kitchen and kissed Sarah on the cheek. "Where's Lily?" she asked, stirring a pot on the stove. "She said she felt a little tired," David replied smoothly. "Said her tummy hurt a bit. I told her to go lie down in her room for a little while. She's probably just exhausted from school." It was a perfect lie. It was plausible, caring, and raised no alarm. Sarah, a trusting mother who had no reason to suspect the man she loved was a monster, simply nodded and continued making dinner. For the rest of the evening, David Palmer played the part of the concerned boyfriend. He set the table. He talked about his day at work. He asked Sarah if she thought they should check on Lily, knowing full well the room was empty. They decided to let her rest. The first crack in this horrifying facade appeared at 8:30 p.m. It was a phone call. It was Mark, calling to say his nightly goodnight to Lily. It was a ritual they never missed. "Hey, can I talk to my little bug?" Mark asked. Sarah, on the other end, explained, "Oh, honey, she's asleep. She wasn't feeling great earlier and went to bed early. David said her tummy was bothering her." Mark felt a small, barely perceptible pang of unease. Lily never went to bed this early, and she never ever missed their goodnight call. But he dismissed it. Kids get sick. He told Sarah to give Lily a kiss for him and hung up. In the background of that call, David sat on the couch watching television, his heart rate perfectly steady. The real alarm was sounded the next morning. At 7 a.m., Sarah went to wake Lily up for school. She opened the bedroom door to find it pristine. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. The pillows were fluffed. The room was silent and empty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She screamed David's name. He came running, his face a mask of manufactured concern. They searched the house, their calls for Lily, growing more and more frantic. They checked the closets, the backyard, under the beds. Nothing. Within minutes, Sarah was on the phone with 911, her voice choked with terror. While she was on the call, David, in a moment of calculated evil, planted the first seed of misdirection. He turned to a distraught Sarah and said, his voice filled with false sympathy, "Oh my God, Sarah, you don't think he would have come back and taken her, do you? He seemed so upset on the phone yesterday." When the first police officers arrived, that seed had already taken root. They were met by a hysterical mother and her calm, supportive boyfriend. David calmly recounted the events of the previous evening. He mentioned Mark's supposed displeasure about Lily going to bed early. He subtly painted the picture of a disgruntled ex-husband, perhaps unhappy with the custody arrangement, who might have snatched his own child. It is a common and tragic feature of such investigations. Police are trained to look at the closest relationships first, and in a case of a missing child from a split home, the other parent is an immediate and logical person of interest. So, while precious hours ticked by, the initial focus of the investigation shifted incorrectly onto Mark Farrow. 2 detectives were dispatched to his home. They found him frantically calling Lily's school and her friend's parents, his voice raw with fear. When the police began questioning him, his fear turned to disbelief, and then to outrage. They asked for his alibi. They asked to search his truck. They treated him not as a grieving father, but as a potential suspect. This was the first systemic failure. A cognitive bias, a leap to the most obvious conclusion that cost the investigation its most critical resource: time. While police were questioning the wrong man, the right man was offering them coffee back at Sarah's house. But they had underestimated the power of a father's love. Mark Farrow, trapped in a nightmare, refused to be a passive victim of suspicion. He knew he hadn't taken Lily. And if she hadn't run away, which he knew his daughter would never do, then the only other possibility was that something had happened to her inside that house. And the only new variable in that house was David. While police were running his plates and checking his phone records, Mark started his own investigation. He sat at his kitchen table, his mind racing, trying to think of anything, any detail that was out of place. And then it hit him. The photos. He and Sarah, in an effort to share pictures of Lily seamlessly, still had a shared family cloud account for their photos. It automatically backed up pictures from both of their phones. Fueled by a desperate, sickening hunch, Mark logged into the account on his laptop. He scrolled through hundreds of photos of Lily smiling, playing, living. And then he went to the one place the police hadn't thought to look: the recently deleted folder. There, he found it. The breakthrough. It was a single photograph, taken 2 days before Lily disappeared. The photo was time-stamped and geolocated to the parking lot of a hardware store. It had been taken on Sarah's phone, but it was not of Sarah or Lily. It was a photo of the open trunk of David Palmer's car. Inside the trunk were a brand new shovel, its blade still gleaming, and 2 large dark green tarps. Mark's blood ran cold. Why would David take a picture of that? Maybe he sent it to someone? Or maybe he took it by accident and then deleted it, not realizing it had already been backed up to the cloud. He didn't hesitate. He immediately called the lead detective, his voice shaking but firm. "You're looking at the wrong person," he said. "His name is David Palmer, and I think I know what he bought to hide my daughter's body." That phone call changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. It was the crucial piece of information that shattered David's carefully constructed facade. The detectives, confronted with this concrete, chilling piece of evidence, immediately shifted their focus. They brought David Palmer back to the station, this time not as a witness, but as a person of interest. The interrogation began politely. David was confident, almost arrogant in his calmness. He leaned back in his chair, portraying himself as a man who was deeply concerned and eager to help. "I just want to find her," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Whatever I can do to help, just ask." The detectives let him talk. They asked him to walk them through the timeline again. He recounted the same story, flawlessly. Lily felt sick. She went to bed. She was gone in the morning. Then one of the detectives slid a printed copy of the photograph across the table. "Can you tell us what this is, David?" For the first time, a flicker of panic appeared in David Palmer's eyes. He stared at the photo of his own car trunk. He was silent for a full 10 seconds. The calm was gone. It's for yard work," he stammered, his story now clumsy and unrehearsed. "I was helping a friend with some landscaping." "What's the friend's name?" the detective asked, his voice flat. John," David said. "John Smith." "What's his address, David? We'd like to talk to him." David couldn't answer. His lies were collapsing in on him. He began to sweat. He changed his story. The shovel was for a project at his own apartment. Then it was for a camping trip that got cancelled. With every lie, the detectives knew they were getting closer. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. David never confessed, but his web of deceit was so tangled and so transparent that they had more than enough to secure a search warrant for Sarah's house and his vehicle. The forensic team descended on the quiet suburban home that evening. To the naked eye, the house was clean. But under the cold chemical glare of luminol, the basement told a different story. A large section of the concrete floor lit up with an eerie blue-white glow. It was the unmistakable signature of blood that had been meticulously scrubbed away. The crime scene was no longer invisible. The search of David's car yielded the shovel. The blade was caked with soil and clay, which forensic analysts immediately sent for testing. In the trunk, they found microscopic traces of bleach and, horrifyingly, a single strand of blonde hair. It was Lily's. The final piece of the puzzle came from David's own research. Police seized his computers. His search history was a confession in digital form. The queries about cleaning blood, the research into soil composition in the nearby Green Valley State Park, it all pointed to a man who had not just committed a crime, but had planned it with cold, calculating precision. Based on the soil analysis from the shovel and his digital footprint, search teams and K9 units were dispatched to the sprawling, dense woods of Green Valley Park. For 2 days, they scoured the area. It was a K9 named Apollo that finally made the discovery. In a remote, secluded clearing, far from any hiking trails, Apollo began to bark insistently at a patch of freshly disturbed earth. They found her. Lily Farrow was buried in a shallow grave, wrapped in the 2 tarps from the hardware store. The discovery was heartbreaking, a confirmation of every parent's worst nightmare. The vibrant, smiling little girl from the drawings was gone. The autopsy report was clinical and devastating. It confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. It also confirmed the time of death was late afternoon on October 15th, just moments after her father had waved goodbye. The findings completely destroyed the narrative David would later try to construct, that it was some kind of accident. The evidence was clear. This was an act of intentional, brutal violence. The trial of David Palmer began 9 months later. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat Mark Farrow, his face a grim, stoic mask of grief. On the other side, Sarah, who looked like a ghost, her body racked with the torment of having trusted the man who murdered her child. The prosecution laid out its case methodically, piece by damning piece. They started with the neighbour's security footage of Mark waving goodbye. They established the chillingly short timeline. They presented the photograph from the cloud account, the digital confession from David's laptop, the luminol results from the basement, the shovel, the soil analysis, and the single blonde hair from the trunk of his car. David's defense was weak, desperate. They argued that it had been a tragic accident. Their story was that David had been playing a chasing game with Lily in the basement, that she had slipped and hit her head. He had panicked, he was scared, and he made a terrible decision to cover it up. But the prosecution dismantled this lie with brutal efficiency. The key testimony came from the medical examiner, who stated unequivocally that Lily's injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. They were the result of multiple, deliberate blows. Another powerful witness was a woman from David's past, an ex-girlfriend who had filed a restraining order against him 2 years prior, an order that was later dismissed when she moved out of state and didn't appear in court. She testified that David had a terrifying, possessive jealousy. She told the jury, her voice trembling, "He told me once that if he couldn't have me all to himself, he would erase anyone who stood in the way." This was the second systemic failure laid bare for the court to see. A previous cry for help had been logged, documented, and ultimately ignored. The system had failed to connect the dots, allowing a predator to move on to his next victim, this time with fatal consequences. But the most gut-wrenching moment of the trial was Mark Farrow's testimony. The prosecutor asked him to describe his last moments with his daughter. Mark, his voice thick with emotion, spoke about their trip for ice cream. He talked about her laughing in the passenger seat, and then he described the wave. "She got to the window," he said, his voice breaking, "and she gave me this big, goofy wave. I waved back. I sat there and watched her. I didn't want to drive away." He paused, looking at the jury, his eyes pleading. "I should have stayed. I should have just stayed there." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict was read in a hushed courtroom. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of tampering with evidence. David Palmer, his face pale and emotionless, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no celebration in the courtroom. There was only the heavy, bittersweet weight of justice delivered too late. Mark Farrow wept silently into his hands. Sarah collapsed, her sobs echoing the catastrophic depth of her loss and betrayal. The verdict was a consequence, not a comfort. It could not bring Lily back. In the aftermath, the lives shattered by David Palmer were left to find a new, broken kind of normal. Sarah, consumed by guilt and grief, moved away and dedicated her life to advocacy. She partnered with lawmakers to champion Lily's Law, a proposed bill that would make records of domestic violence restraining orders, even those that were dismissed on technicalities, more easily accessible during certain background checks. She fought so that the warnings she never had might be available to someone else. Mark Farrow remained in his home, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had been stolen. He kept every one of Lily's drawings. Her room remained untouched, a perfect, painful museum of a childhood cut short. The love for his daughter, once a source of pure joy, now became a source of profound, unending sorrow. This case, in the end, is a haunting reminder of a terrifying truth. The monster you should fear is rarely the stranger lurking in the shadows. It is far more often the person you invite into your home, the person who earns your trust, the person who smiles while sharpening their knives. David Palmer was not a bogeyman. He was a quiet accountant who used normalcy as camouflage. His crime was enabled by our collective desire to believe the best in people, to accept a pleasant facade as proof of a good heart. It was enabled by a legal system that saw a dismissed restraining order as a closed case, rather than a chapter in a dangerous story. It was enabled by a police response that initially followed a script instead of the evidence. What you must take away from this is not just the story of one man's evil, but a crucial, life-saving lesson. Trust your instincts. When a person's actions, however small, create a pattern of control, possession, and jealousy, do not explain it away. And most importantly, when someone, especially a woman, tells you they are afraid of a person, believe them. The first time. Do not wait for proof. because proof often arrives far too late in the form of a forensic report. 40 seconds. That's all it was. The time it takes to wait for a red light to turn green. The time it takes to listen to the chorus of a song. For Mark Farrow, it is the eternity that separates the last beautiful memory of his daughter from the horrifying knowledge of her final moments. It is the wave, frozen in time, a constant, agonizing reminder of the love that was, and the monster who was waiting just behind the glass.